Welcome, everybody. We want to dive today into regenerative agriculture as a key solution for the climate and many other topics. And my name is Walter Link, and we are doing this webinar in preparation for a series of events that we are doing in Egypt before and during COP27. And obviously, we are in a very urgent climate crisis, and at the same time, a lot of other crises are going on in the world. And so it's easy to turn away one's attention from the climate. And we really can't afford that. So we very much hope that you will stay engaged overall in the climate, and also join us at the Future Economy Forum in Egypt. And that program you can find under futureeconomy.forum. And today I would like to introduce to you three experts in the field of regenerative agriculture. And I myself also got into this topic early on because I grew up partially on a farm in Germany, and I had the opportunity to turn this farm from a conventional farm into a much more successful regenerative agriculture model for the whole region in southern Germany. And after much criticism and doubt about whether this could work from the people that I knew growing up in this region, people then recognized this was really a very inspiring solution for the agriculture in general, and also for their farms and so forth. So a lot has happened since then, and now I would like to bring in the other participants. So you see up there my friend Helmy Abouleish, who is the CEO of Sekem. And Sekem is our partner in creating these events in Egypt. It's an amazing institution. Since decades, they are demonstrating real sustainable development in Egypt. And they have a farm and a whole farming community with thousands of farmers involved, and also regenerative companies that are demonstrating the opportunity that regenerative economy offers in agriculture, in retail, and other areas. And so we will hear from him in a moment. I also have with us Hunter Lovins. And Hunter is also a regenerative agriculture expert from the US. But really globally, she is an expert. She has written over 15 books about natural capitalism and many other topics of the transformation of the economy. She's also a rancher in Colorado. And we had the great fortune to work together for many years already, co-founding the first sustainable MBA that was fully accredited in the US. And, she is with us also at COP. And so is also Merijn Dols, who is sitting with the loudspeakers there, headphones. And he is the global director for open innovation and circularity at Danone, of course, a food company that is also a B Corp, and that has done a lot to consider how to transition very large companies and large food systems into the direction of more sustainability, more regeneration. And he is also a globally recognized expert in the field. So I want to go now to Helmy and ask him to tell us something more about Sekem and the regenerative agriculture activities that you have, and how you also translate that into international business and founding of the Demeter and biodynamic movement in the German-speaking area in Europe and so forth. Please, Helmy.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to join you here. And just with a quick introduction, my father, Ibrahim Abouleish, founded in 1977, 45 years ago, with a dream to
Helmy, we are not hearing you anymore. This is, of course, the challenge of global communication. Then we maybe move first to Hunter. And Hunter, please introduce yourself maybe already with a concrete question. And that is, regenerative agriculture has an amazing breadth of opportunity that ranges, of course, from soil and water and food production and health to climate and farming communities and so forth. So as you introduce, your background, please also address the variety of opportunities that regenerative agriculture offers to us.
You started off, Walter, by talking about the global climate crisis, and indeed, we are in a complete crisis of the climate. The good news, we know how to solve it. If we stop emitting carbon into the atmosphere, which means transitioning to renewable energy so that we stop burning fossil fuels, we then can roll climate change backward using regenerative agriculture by taking carbon out of the air, which is what plants do, putting it into the soil, which is what plants do. And if you switch away from industrial agriculture, which means breaking the soil, planting annual crops, using a lot of fossil fueled machinery, fossil fueled chemicals, if you switch to growing food the way nature does with diverse crops, deep-rooted crops, and then animal impact, grazing down the cover crops so that you can drill seed your, for example, corn, soybean, whatever commodity you're trying to grow, you are taking carbon out of the air, putting it through the deep roots, very deep into the soil. We can sequester at least a ton of carbon per acre per year. And if we did that on the world's grasslands, for example, over something like 100 years' time, we could roll back to the 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 that existed when humans evolved onto the planet. Now, that's a big statement. We know it's possible because papers, for example, by scientists like Greg Retallack showed that millions of years ago, the Earth had concentrations of CO2 at 1,000 parts per million. Now, humans weren't here, and there were palm trees and crocodiles in Greenland. It's not a very nice climate, but the Earth decarbonized using grasslands and grazing animals. We can do it again by mimicking what nature has shown us how to do and increase the productivity of ground. You can double the carrying capacity of grazing animals. You can dramatically increase food production, vegetable production. Our colleague Vijay Kumar is doing this in India, tripling farmer productivity, thus profits, while eliminating all of the chemicals, thus eliminating all of the poisons, and putting enormous amounts of carbon into the soil. So we know what to do. We just need to get about it, which is, of course, what Helmy is doing at Sekem in Egypt. I was honored to win the Right Livelihood Award with Sekem, his father representing it, and have been following Sekem for years because it is one of the best examples of doing this in the global south with some of the poorest people on earth and producing abundant food, fiber, products that you can sell into the market. So Helmy, if you're here, maybe you can tell us what you're doing now.
I hope I can do it now, and I thank you very much for this introduction. And indeed, the intention to grow through biodynamic agriculture, reclaim desert and grow in the desert all kinds of crops, turned out to work. Also, everyone thought it's a mission impossible. It turned out to work perfectly. And especially as we started very early on to have really an integrated farm with animals, with manure, with compost making, with a lot of attention to our soils, and plants and crop rotation and trees. But actually, we early on could recognize that in terms of true cost accounting, biodynamic farming in Egypt turned out to be much, much more efficient, productive, cheaper than conventional agriculture. Unfortunately, this is only the case and only shows when you factor in the externalized cost you just mentioned, the carbon, the 1 ton of carbon per hectare, the carbon in your trees, and the methane you avoid by producing out of organic matter or organic waste, wonderful compost. The great thing is that 4 or 5 years ago, we started to prototype this. We found out that an Egyptian farmer could, in the desert, sequester or avoid emittance of up to 17 tons of CO2 equivalent carbon per acre. And in a mix of all these 3 methodologies you mentioned. And in the Nile Delta, where we have very rich soils, it's still 10 tons per acre per year. And when we then found out that for these carbon credits, for the CO2 credits, he could get on a voluntary carbon market much too cheap, not reflecting the real cost of 1 ton of CO2 for future generations, but at the moment at 20 or 25 euros, he could then get an additional income more than from his main crop, whether it's wheat or rice or cotton or whatever. Then we thought, now we are on it. We have a lever for system change, which will help us to really turn around the whole agricultural system of Egypt. And we upscaled it to 2,000 farmers the last 2 years, and it worked. And now with partners from Egypt, partners from all over the world, from the different sectors of research, capacity building, funding, governance, we want to upscale it to 40,000 farmers in the next 2 years. This is our aim, our big dream. And together I think we can announce the start of this project at COP27. And for this, I hope we will use then the Future Economy Forum, Walter has already mentioned, and many of the side events and off-site events we are planning and joining.
And maybe it's important to add that this is done in partnership with the Cairo Stock Exchange and the Ministry of Agriculture, showing that also in the Global South, these very innovative approaches can land right in the center, in the mainstream of the economy. And that's really our purpose with the Future Economy Forum, is to transform the mainstream of the economy into a truly regenerative system. And this is also what we can witness if you join us at Sekem from November 2nd to November 4th in concrete implementation. And then from November 4th to November 6th, we go to Cairo to meet with the stock exchange, to meet with the business community of Egypt, and to talk about these inspiring projects from around the world that have the potential to move the system in Egypt forward into this direction of a regenerative mainstream economy. And again, you find the information under futureeconomy.forum. And this leads me to Merijn Dols, And Merijn, you are really an expert in large scaling this transformation, and you are involved not only inside of Danone, but really with the Google Lab, with many other institutions around the world, and seeing of how can we, bring about this mainstreaming of regenerative agriculture. So please introduce yourself, your work, and how we can address these issues.
Thank you, Walter, and also Hunter and Helmy. Indeed, I think both Hunter actually and Helmy already introduced, on one hand side, part of the problem, on the other hand side, the humongous opportunity that is in front of us. If we look at the issue that we have, the biggest ecosystem out there is actually not, as we might think, for instance, forest. It is actually agricultural land. So the regime to go after is the regime that today is a big part of the problem, driving both climate change, but also driving actually social disparity and other fundamental issues that we're facing right now. On the other hand side, it's also part of the solution. So if we look at the issue and we go to these externalities, we published some research together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we've seen that for every dollar or every euro or whichever currency you want to use of revenue within the food system that we generate, actually we are generating $2 or euros in negative externalities. One in health cost or social cost. So think, for example, about the rising cost of treating things like diabetes. And on the other hand side, one in ecosystem costs. For example, the fact that we can no longer swim in the lake that is close by because it's just filled with NPK and therefore there's algae blooms. And so we had 1 for 2. Quite frankly, when we did the data, we could have argued 1 for 5. But we took the most conservative numbers so that nobody, even the fiercest critic, could argue with us. So actually what we consider to be cheap food today actually isn't cheap. We're just not paying it when we are in a supermarket or in the market or wherever we buy our food. On the other hand side, there is also a tremendous opportunity. There's the opportunity that Hunter was already alluding to. Then there's the opportunity that Helmy was alluding to, which is the opportunity of the carbon markets. But now we're also starting to see that when we start to price actually the value of ecosystem services, the New York Stock Exchange, together with Intrinsic Exchange Group, actually built a model for this fairly recently and announced it, that we have the potential to generate 125 trillion US dollars value every year. So if we look at this, then basically what we are facing is we're facing a huge economic opportunity where a company like Danone has to find ways to transform its current agricultural footprint that has a mostly depletive impact into a regenerative impact, and find a way to do that that makes economic sense. So how do we transition from the system that we have today towards a system where actually we are no longer trying to dominate nature, but we're working with nature? And that's the heart of what we're doing every day.
Mm-hmm. And Hunter, you mentioned Vijay Kumar, who will also joining us in Egypt. And Vijay, I think, demonstrates that even on very small scale farms of an acre or so, you can triple the harvests and therefore generate 80% more income for the farmers. And he's doing that in a really amazing way. And Hunter, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Vijay's work, with whom we have been working together.
Vijay started out with a job of empowering women, realized that the women with whom he was working were suffering because of the nature of the farming that their families were doing. It was heavily dependent on pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, machinery, which they had to buy because the so-called Green Revolution had said, oh, this is the way that you increase productivity. It was impoverishing millions of farmers. So he started working with women's groups, women's self-help groups, to help their husbands, their farming families, realize that if they took a set of principles that were developed by a farmer rancher in North Dakota named Gabe Brown of not breaking the soil, so minimal impact on the soil, living root in the soil year round, armor on the soil, so biomass cover year round, diversity of crops in the soil, and then the animal impact, plus 4 more principles that are indigenous to India. So the use of compost and manure, as Helmy was mentioning, creation of a fungal inoculant that they wrap the seeds in, so the seeds get a jump start from the mycorrhizal fungi, no poisons, just eliminating all of that. With these principles, they could dramatically cut their cost, increase their productivity, increase the bionutrient density of the food they were eating, thus increasing health of the farm communities. Previously, farmers would plant just before the monsoon, and they'd have to estimate, is the monsoon coming now or a month from now? The rest of the year, the fields were bare. They were decarbonizing. Every time you see a bare farm, a bare field, you are looking at carbon and nitrogen going into the air. By now having living root in the ground year round, the farmers are harvesting year round. So they get 3 crops a year, much higher nutrient density, much healthier farmers, farm communities. Vijay realized farmers learn from farmers, not from experts on Zoom calls. So he started identifying these champion farmers and helping them go to other villages. He spread this amongst the landless farmers, so the poorest of the poor, the farmers on an acre or less, to now millions of farmers across India in 9 states of India. He's also working with people like Million Belay in Africa, who is doing what he calls agroecology. Helmy called it biodynamic. We call it regenerative. It's all the same thing. It's understanding how nature works best and then aligning ourselves with these universal principles, which Buckminster Fuller called the regenerative essence of how the universe works.
Helmy, you are also selling then these products, and so do many of your colleagues in the Demeter and other biodynamic organic industries. Tell us how that then connects us to the many consumers in the global south where you're selling and the global north, and creates a food system, a healthy, regenerative food system.
We are very happy that we are able to produce these Demeter products since 45 years. We were always focusing on selling them in the local market in Egypt, which was not a terribly well-developed Demeter or even organic market 45 years ago, and still is not. So this obviously was a huge entrepreneurial challenge, how to sell supposedly more expensive biodynamic products in a market where people cannot afford. This needs entrepreneurial skills. This needs adding value through processing and changing the raw materials into finished products. And this is what we did. And so we are happy that 80% of what we produce under Demeter and organic is sold in Egypt. And now with our new attempt to really help smallholding farmers all over Egypt to go to biodynamic, we could go even one step further by asking them if they get the carbon credit as an additional income to sell their products at conventional prices or lower, to make it easy for customers and consumers in Egypt to really switch and to take the purchase decisions, the right purchase decisions. And my partners and friends in Europe, in the US, who get also our Demeter raw materials, who also sell Demeter products in the local organic health food markets, can also tell you a story about the price sensitivity of European customers. It's unbelievable when you imagine that after all these years of crises after crisis, after all these years of education, capacity building, awareness raising, where actually most people, educated people in Europe, know the difference, know the impact of regenerative organic agroecology, biodynamic, as you said, doesn't really matter in comparison to conventional, and especially in animal husbandry, where the last 8 pandemics out of 9 came from animals. So all these impacts, all these issues are known, and still 8% of German consumers consume regenerative products. 92% prefer to buy cheaper conventional products. What does this mean? And especially that in a situation as the one we have this year, it even goes down for another 10 to 20% when people get the feeling that the world is difficult. So they start to save money, but at the wrong place. And I think we have to recognize that price, for whatever reason, is still a huge argument in the purchase decision of people, consumers. And while we want to get everyone on board for organic, healthy, environmental friendly products, we must move and we must find innovative solutions to prove that we are not only better, healthier, and tastier, we can also be more reasonably priced. This will be a totally new phase, very, very difficult for many of my pioneer colleagues in the movement, whom got their own satisfaction from being better and more expensive. But I think we have, for the sake of everyone on the planet and the system change which wants to come, to find solutions now to reach all consumers in the south and in the north.
Yeah.
Walter,
if I may, I'd love to build on what Helmy is saying.
Yeah. Go.
Because actually, we've recently seen this happening with the recent increase in prices of non-renewable inputs, oil prices rising, gas prices going through the roof. If we look at internally at comparisons between conventional milk and organic milk, then actually, because conventional milk, for example, is so much more dependent on non-renewable inputs, we are now seeing that even though some price-sensitive consumers are switching to organic, and farmers in some countries are no longer getting any premium on their organic milk, they're still having a healthier business than their colleagues running an industrial, degenerative, conventional operation, because they're simply so dependent on energy inputs. And so I think what we're seeing is actually a movement where if we work with nature rather than bend nature to our will, then actually we're also much more resilient to shocks to the system like the one we're experiencing right now, even in the global north.
And we will also have with us in in Egypt, some outstanding farmers from Brazil that work on huge scales. So one of our friends there, Leontino Balbo, who has a brand called Native, produces 1/3 of the world's organic cane sugar. And it's a perfect example of higher productivity, lower pest and drought impacts, and therefore a much more profitable business. And also it shows that if you do regenerative agriculture right, you can even have monocrops, because he is basically cultivating huge amounts of sugarcane, which in conventional cultivation is super destructive for the soil and the health of the people working on the farm and the overall environment and the climate. But the way he is able to do it, he actually has greater biodiversity in the monocrop sugarcane fields than in the surrounding forests. He's seeing animals come back into these fields that haven't been seen for decades in this area. And as a result, also large brands want to be associated with it. And I think, Merijn, this is also important because you, of course, represent a very large food brand. More and more, next to the price, also the story matters. And so many of the big brands are buying from Leontino because he can offer them not only a competitive product, but a much better story. Merijn, tell us a little bit about that importance of the brand in this whole transformation context.
So I think the importance of the brand here is twofold. On one hand side, we see a shift in consumer awareness. We see consumers coming in that no longer compartmentalize. So the values that they hold dear and that drive them, their internal compass drives them in the way they choose their employer as much as it drives them in the choices they make when they're shopping. On the other hand side, if you go into a store, you need a PhD in impact, and quite frankly, even if you were to have a PhD in impact, it is still pretty much impossible in a split second to navigate a supermarket shelf and really understand what the impact is of each of those products. Now, that is where brands come in, because brands have the opportunity to be a filter for people and basically to position themselves as being the security, if you will, to know that whatever you're purchasing, wherever you're putting your money, you're voting for the world that you want tomorrow. And that's the power that we, because we're all consuming food, that we as consumers have, is every time we spend money on food, we can vote for what the future we want, what future we want tomorrow. And so I think that is where there's a real opportunity for brands. That's where you also see, of course, on one hand side, greenwashing. On the other hand side, you might even think about greenwashing as saying, well, actually, that's a precursor, that it's starting to become important enough that people at least want to get the story out there, even if sometimes the story isn't completely true. Now we need to follow up with setting the right rules and standards to make sure that the consumer can trust those stories. But they are hugely powerful.
Hunter, Helmy comments on this large scaling into the system.
I think as long as we target, Hunter, you wanted to start. You start.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Please go.
Okay, I wanted just to say we want to feed the world. And in Egypt, we have 7 million smallholding farmers on 10 million acres. And we have few thousand big farms in the desert on 2 million or 3 million acres. And the question is not either or. The question is everyone is needed. The big ones, the medium ones, the small ones, the micro ones. And the good part of the answer is, and it's possible. As we heard, for the big ones, they can reach it sometimes without monetizing on their ecosystem services with very, very good smart agriculture. And if they would also then include the ecosystem service part, it would be even more obvious that they can not only compete in the market of organic, but also in the market of conventional sugar. And so I think it's very important not to have a recipe on size of a farm. It is the entrepreneurship, the sky is the limit. And according to the scale, the country, the context, the entrepreneur, the form of farming, there is no answer for me. We have big farms in Sekem where we do this. We have smaller farms where we do it ourselves. And we have small farmers who do it better. So there is no guarantee on anything. We have to work and we have to allow and support, enhance and promote regenerative, organic or biodynamic farming in all its formats everywhere.
Absolutely. There is a myth that big industry, big agriculture will feed the world. It can't, it never has. Something like 70%, 80% of the world's food comes from smallholder farmers. These are the agents of change that we need. We need to empower them to be able to do this in the best possible way. We know that, from Vijay's work, from Gabe Brown's work, from work of regenerative farmers the world around, when they make this transition, they are more productive. They are healthier. Their communities are healthier. The trick is, how do we enable them to make this transition? Most farmers live on the edge with tiny margins. And one crop failure, they're out of business, or they and their family are dead. And now around the world, there is famine, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, to the Horn of Africa, to wherever climate catastrophes have hit. They need help to make this transition. The approach that Helmy is taking with getting carbon credits to these smallholder farmers is the way that these people can become the agents of change to solve the climate crisis, and at the same time feed the world, and at the same time stop the future pandemics. You put all of this together in a holistic solution, and we have the answer to almost all of the crises facing us. It's a question of intelligently using market forces. The cost, now recognized, article out about a month ago in Science, the actual cost of carbon in the air is about $185 a ton. This is the societal cost that it imposes on all of us. Whether you are the people in Florida who are wiped out, or Pakistan with a third of the country still underwater, or the people across the north of Africa who have had a 40-year drought, the costs are very high of not solving this problem, particularly when we know how to solve it. So enabling payment for ecosystem services, which these farmers are delivering to all of us by sequestering carbon, is good business. It's also climate justice. It's what is needed now in the world. And I know a lot of activists say, oh, markets are evil. Meat production is evil. What's evil is how it's done badly. We need to just get a little smarter and do it right. It's not the cow, it's the how. It's not the market, It's how are you using these market mechanisms to ensure that you're delivering justice?
Yeah. And I think we can see now, because of success on all scales, that, and with all crops and all geographies, with all animals, that we have the solutions. And yet the question will be, how are we going to large scale these solutions? So this is why in the Egypt events, we are delivering also to COP, where of course global policy making and national policy making is being discussed, these concrete solutions, but also we are discussing about how to bring it to farmers around the world, millions and millions of farmers who are not part of the large communication and education systems. And so, for example, we will have with us Father Charles, who is a director of the Jesuits in Africa. And what is amazing and often ignored is how faith communities, whether they're Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, have the trust of people, especially in the countryside around the world and in the global south. And so what we're also going to talk about is how we can take the knowledge of how to change agriculture, which Leontino Balbo, that I mentioned earlier, says can be communicated in cartoons. You don't need to be literate to understand how to become a regenerative farmer, and combine it with the trust that farmers have in faith communities and each other, which is again the learning from Vijay Kumar, these communities of farmers that support each other. So we need to think about what is our theory of change to bring this to millions and millions of farmers around the world. And this is what I want to close with. We have 3 minutes left here. If each of you would take a moment and say, like, what is your theory of change, of how we can scale this transformation? Hunter, we start with you.
I am just one person. What can I do? Said 8 billion people. If each of us steps up and does what it is that we can do when we buy something, when we invest in something, the decisions we make on a daily basis, these problems will solve themselves.
We end with Helmy, our host in Egypt. So Merijn, it goes to you.
Mine is close to Hunter's. The shift that needs to happen is a fundamental shift in the way we relate to the system, shifting from bending nature to our will to being an integral part of nature and working with nature, both in our economy and in our ecology and our farming. That only happens at an individual level. So change is made at an individual level. So we have 8 billion people to reach. The beauty of it, though, is that it doesn't take time. That shift in the way we relate to the system happens instantly. It's literally an epiphany that we can feel in our heart and our gut. So we can change one by one, but from there on, it can spread like wildfire. And I think that's exactly what we need.
Helmy.
I continue on Merijn saying that I agree it doesn't need a majority of the 8 billion. I think it needs a critical mass to reach a tipping point for system change. Wherever this lies, it doesn't lie at 50%, it lies much lower. So how to reach this point, I of course agree that the enlightenment path would be that every single one of us, out of his understanding and vision and feeling and love for the earth, would do the right steps. In the absence of a majority of these people, around me at least at the moment, I am searching for the tools in the current world order. I'm searching for a way to make the economic and capitalistic ideas, which are so deeply ingrained in every one of us, work for us and make it, as you said, Hunter, the better business, the more profitable, more resilient, and hence, in the end, the mainstream business. And then on the path out, I hope everyone will also get enlightened, inspired, and does it not only for economic benefits, but also because of his love for planet Earth, which is the most valuable thing we can ever give.
So with this, I want to bring us to an end and to remind us again at the futureeconomy.forum site. And the whole forum is really about concrete solutions of how to move towards this new economy and to hear about models of how it's already happening, because it's not something that is still a philosophy or that needs to somehow still find a way into application. No, it's already happening right now, and there are going to be many examples of companies that are more successful as their competitors now because they practice what we call regenerative value creation, which integrates business success and economic development with the regeneration of people and societies and nature. And that's at the heart of the system change. So we do not need to choose profit over our heart. We can actually integrate all of this. And this is what these events are about in our long-term work. And I hope you all will join us in Egypt and our journey for the coming decades as we co-create a new mainstream of the economy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.